Hello, everyone, and welcome finally to another episode of that Esports Podcast. This time we're talking all about coaches, and luckily my co-host Josh is also a coach as well, so he's managed another week of being a host / the guest. But actually, we've got a real guest this time as well. We've got Enatron over from Dignitas, where you're at the moment. Welcome, Enatron. How's it going?
Nice to meet you. I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Good.
Yes, very good. So as I said, kind of the idea then is to talk about coaches, work out what they do. You know, as a fan looking in, it can be difficult to work out exactly what is the point of a coach outside of draft. I guess that's like the most obvious one.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll just ask you that then, to nice and simple to start with. What is the role of a coach? What are the responsibilities?
I mean, in general, people, as you say, they have been seen as draft machines, but I think a coach in the current, there are many different of coach roles, right? There is a positional coach, there is a strategic coach, there is a head coach, right? In my case, where is the head coach is more like, I see it more as a coordinator between all the members, call it players, call it staff, and same time be in charge of creating a team identity for the team. And according to that team identity that you create, you're focusing your practice around that. So basically, you create systems, you create a practice schedule, you coordinate with the rest of the staff in order to create a healthy environment for the players to work in. And once all these are done, then you're actually diving into the game, right? And this is where actually the drafting comes, the review of the games comes, having one-on-one constant talks with the players, making sure that the motivation and the confidence of the players is there, and that the group has an idea of how they want to perform all together, and how they stick together as one and follow the team identity that you have established to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the key word there is coordination, right? I think that there's like Anatron said, like Elias said, there's multiple roles even for a head coach as well as multiple coaching staff roles, but there's multiple varying types of head coaches throughout all different teams all over all different regions. But ultimately, my view, again, similarly, is the coordination is the key. There's a lot of moving parts beneath you, whether that be players, whether that be other coaching roles or analysts that ultimately have to be pushing in the same direction or rowing in the same direction for a team to work and for a team to function and grow. And coordination is really a part of a good leader, which enables that coordination amongst all the moving parts to, like I say, row in the same direction to allow that team to flourish.
Mm-hmm. It's a good segue to a different question I had then about all those different types of coaches that you mentioned. That's another thing that, as an outsider looking in, you hear, okay, this guy's signed as a positional coach or assistant coach. What is the difference then? So if I list through them and we get a quick rundown of what each one does. So what would be an assistant coach then, first of all?
I prefer not to use anymore the term of assistant coach because I don't value my staff inferior to me or higher to me. I like to see all ourselves as equals with different type of responsibilities. I like to consider myself as the person that shares those responsibilities, right? So instead of what before some years ago we'd call it an assistant coach, right now I think we call it more of a strategic coach, right? And basically, since you're having to take care of so many different aspects of the team, call it personalities, call it in-game stuff, like you're able to split a bit those responsibilities to the rest of your staff. So, for example, a strategic coach is more in charge of creating strategies according to the vision you have for your team and being able to establish strategic plans according to how the team wants to play. This could mean create draft ideas, or this could mean specific map rotations at the game, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The positional coach, for example, is someone that has an expertise on specific position or positions, depending on the guy, of course, right? Uh, and he can go really in depth with a player about details that maybe even the head coach or the strategic coach are not able to say. So basically, how I see it, the staff organized is you go from the whole into the individual slowly by dividing responsibilities all the way. So as I don't see anyone, I think, for example, a position coach knows maybe in some case more stuff than a head coach, So that's why I don't think a position coach is inferior to me or superior to me. I think everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses, and we create a whole that we are able to cover each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think in the past there was this kind of this hiring of an assistant coach, which is almost a less experienced version of the head coach alongside a head coach that would just assist in many duties. Whereas, like I says, now it's much more of a case of what's the point of having someone who just knows everything that the head coach does, but not quite as well yet, and does those same roles, but just with less experience. In reality, what's needed is more specific knowledge around certain areas that can be really targeted towards where the team needs improvement, whether that be in a positional coach role, looking at a particular lane or a particular role within the team that needs some serious improvement or work, or whether that's overall team strategy that, like Kala said, the head coaches have a numerous amount of responsibility, not only to the direct in-game kind of strategic areas of the game, but actually the culture, the environment, the structure of practice, everything around a team. So having someone who has a more perhaps specialist knowledge in particular areas, how to get certain in-game concepts across to a team, even better in some cases than a head coach, is really valuable to, top tier head coaches around the world.
Mm-hmm. Just another question on the positional coaches then, because kind of likening it back to a traditional sports, like in a football team, you probably would have coaches that are better at attacking, and you'd maybe be an ex-striker who has gone into coaching. You'd have a goalkeeping coach, defensive coach. You could kind of maybe see it's a similar sort of thing in, for example, League of Legends. They would be focused on a certain role, but then it's not like traditional sports where, and mainly because of, I guess, maybe even budgeting or what, you wouldn't have one for every single position. So most teams would have one, maybe two. I'm not sure I've even seen a team with two positional coaches. So would you find that there's a certain role in particular that is most important to get in a positional coach when you maybe can only have one?
I think it depends a lot on the strengths and the weaknesses of a roster. As an example here, in our veteran roster here at Dignitas, we have basically a rookie position on the AD carry. So we focused on getting a position coach to cover that. You can call it weakness. I like to call it more development, more focus in order the transition to be more smooth for the specific player, So I think acknowledging the weaknesses or the developing piece that you want to have in your roster, you can invest more there in your positional coach. If all the players are 5 veterans, I think having maybe more strategic coach could actually help more than a positional coach, for example. This doesn't have to be right, but since you mentioned like if we have to only choose one, for example, in a position, I would prefer to have, for example, something with a more universal knowledge kind of, instead of having to be specific at an in-depth knowledge of a guy. I think in an ideal world, you're having 5 different position coaches for each player, and you're helping them grow. But since reality is quite different, right? I think acknowledging where is your development piece, I think this is where you want to invest the resources that you're missing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I think you're right, Lee. In some regards, it's budgeting as to why you don't see multiple, like as many positional coaches, or like all 5 across the roster. In lots of cases, sometimes it's practicality and trying to create a structure or a practice training structure that caters for 5 positional coaches looking after their 5 players, as well as having time as a collective, as a team. Because I think these days we know that League is way more about how cohesive the collective is, as opposed to just so many players are very highly skilled now individually. But it's how you kind of create that cohesive unit, which is often the key between a good team and 5 good individuals. But yeah, I mean, I think again going back to kind of what Elias said, in his particular roster, he's got a rookie position of the AD carry role. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the worst position, quote unquote, but what it does mean is that perhaps those players in that role haven't had the level of experience playing at that level versus the perhaps opponents that may punish them for some of the mistakes they might have made at academy or playing at a slightly lesser level. They haven't actually experienced the level of kind of punishment they'll get for their mistakes compared to some of the veteran players that have been playing at that level for years, or maybe have gone to worlds. Maybe, I mean, Elias got some very experienced faces in that team now that have competed at MSIs, competed at world championships multiple times, and those players have faced the kind of punishment that they'll get if they make certain mistakes in certain matchups that perhaps the younger ones won't have had that shared that same experience. So completely understand why budget allocated to positional coaches in those areas may be really, really important for a roster like Dignitas in this case.
Yeah, fair enough. And that kind of brings me to another question about kind of linking there what you said about having like a cohesive unit. And so this kind of relates to something that's going on at the moment as well. So Astralis in the LEC over in Europe, which for any non-League of Legends fans is like the Tier 1 European League. They just got rid of an assistant coach, Vandetto. I did an interview with him, so shout out to that. Quick plug, go and give that a read. But basically the reason is that they kind of got him in, and by the sounds of things, they hadn't really consulted with the actual head coach. And it's ended up being that their philosophy of the head coach and him as the assistant coach, they didn't agree on how the game should be played, and they basically just had different views like that. It wasn't that either one was a bad coach; it was just that their ideas just clashed. So, do you think, in that sense, that it's good for head coaches to maybe have like a group of backroom staff that they kind of take with them? I know, Josh, you had a partnership with John for I think a number of years, who's kind of now branched out on his own. But do you see that as being valuable to kind of have a set number of staff, or at least 1 or 2 people that you can kind of bring along from team to team?
In my experience, it's less common in esports at present. I think it makes sense that it becomes more common. Maybe Elias has got a different view on this or a shared view, but I think, I mean, your Astralis example is a good one. It doesn't matter how good the head coach is, doesn't matter how good the assistant coach is, if they are not rowing in the same direction, like we mentioned before when we're talking about what the role of a head coach, if that head coach cannot get the people working with him and around him rowing in the same direction, the team will not work, or that at least that piece won't contribute effectively to the growth of the team. So I think people that share a philosophy with you, people that understand that the head coach is kind of the culture, the environment, and the philosophy that is persistent under that kind of head coach, are very valuable to the head coach. And I think often when a head coach finds those kind of staff, it makes a lot of sense that they stick together, even if there's a move. Obviously, there are other things that come into play when perhaps a head coach moves from one roster to another or one team to another, and that being kind of contracts, that being what budget is new team has, what level is new team is at, various different kind of things that play, factors that come into play when those decisions are made. But in a dream world, I think for a coach to have a trusted backroom staff is super valuable. I don't know if you've got anything to add on to that, Elias, or if you've got experience of taking staff with you from one place to another.
I mean, for sure, having people that you can trust and share the same vision as you is important. I think when you are hiring or you're having a specific number of staff with you, right? It's really important if there is a conflict of ideas to be a healthy one, that it can lead to growth rather than under development, basically. So as long as the generic idea is similar, I think you can have whoever you want as your staff. So I'm not necessarily locked at. Ideally, I would like to work with people that I've worked in the past and they share a similar idea with me on how to create a culture in a team or how the identity of the team to grow, But also I think it's part of the head coach job too, right? To make sure having this weekly check that we're having here with the current staff here in Dignitas, for example, and make sure that we are all on the same track of the same calls, basically. I think it has to do a lot also with how you want to share responsibilities, and you see the reaction of your of the rest of your staff. So, for example, what I'm doing is every week I'm providing responsibilities to the rest of the staff according to the idea of how I want the team to practice this week. Let's say I'm facing two teams this weekend, let's say, and uh, I want my team to play in this style versus those teams. It could mean maybe uh, go and camp the mid laner, or execute a 1-3-1 type of composition during the weekend. I'm gonna put responsibilities to the rest of the staff according to monitor that idea of mine. If they go against that, and this is where I think there is the healthy conflict, as I mentioned, I'm sitting together with them and actually I'm checking their thoughts and ideas, and then we decide to reach a conclusion together. Of course, if eventually you reach a point where the two people cannot come into a same conclusion, then situations like the Australian coaches that you mentioned probably happen. But it's really important going into the season, from the off season, for me to be interviewing properly the candidates, or actually getting the stuff from previous teams that I felt like I was working great with them.
Yeah, it seems like in this Astralis example that perhaps, I mean, based on what you said, Lee, that the head coach didn't have a say in the assistant coach coming in, which is quite strange in generally. I think the other thing that we kind of haven't really touched upon with the head coach's kind of umbrella of culture and identity and philosophy shaping down. It also needs to branch out to the academy team, and we see when there's, I think probably more so in NA than in Europe, the smoother academy transitions from academy to starting lineups or main LCS rosters, where there's stuff like in-game terminology, there's stuff like the way the game is taught. If that is almost two separate teams, as in the academy team does things completely entirely their way with a different philosophy, with a different culture, and then the starting LCS team or LEC team does things in their way, then that transition is often very difficult for upcoming players who move from one to the other. There are some teams that successfully kind of share knowledge, share identity, share culture, and it becomes all under one umbrella, as opposed to two separate teams. In Europe, I think some teams are known to kind of only half put effort into their academy teams, and their academy teams are just an additional team in an ERL. Whereas if you can have that kind of synergy or that trickling down of knowledge and culture from your main roster to your academy, I think the future of transitions from academy to main team becomes much smoother and much easier to manage.
Definitely. Right, I only had a couple more questions then on the kind of additional staff. Just to go back to that for a second. So we talked about assistant coach, positional coach, strategic coach. I'm guessing is kind of like assistant coach. It's just by the sounds of things, more or less a different way of saying it. Performance coach. I feel like this one's going to be the most different potentially. Is that more just sort of like out the game stuff, like even like health, nutrition, those kind of things, or
what have you got at Dignitas around kind of outside of game performance and performance coach stuff, Elias?
I mean, we have been using the year before in-office performance coach, actually. He was assisting a lot of when it came down to the culture, to office standards around. I was helping with the players pre-game meditation, for example, trying to maintain the focus of the players throughout the week. This year, unfortunately, we don't have the specific person with us. So this year I have been more using like a performance coach and more of a form of consultancy kind of here at Dig. So basically any type of question I would have on how to handle the group, on how to establish even smoother the culture, if I'm doing things right, if I'm doing things wrong, So basically he's just guiding me. It's more like a personal coaching than actually the performance coach talking the whole group. And in the case that, as we said, there is also always a budget thing, right? But in the case that the whole group would actually need that performance coach, for example, then would actually bring that specific person here in the office and have the chance to talk with everybody. But for now, I'm using him more. He's talking through me, let's put it like this, to the players, But in my previous teams and the previous year too, I used to have a performance coach to be around me. And as I said, the coordination with all the staff was important. And I think on a daily basis, I was starting the day talking with him how we want to approach, for example, breaks or pre-game talks or pre-game planning into after-game, after scrim effect of performance, for example, or discuss potential problems that happen during the day and how we can solve those type of problems. So a performance coach to me was like a human resources type of guy that was helping with any personal problems, basically.
I think this can really vary massively team to team in one, how they view the importance of that role. I think that's become more prevalent, the importance of that role in recent years, but also what that role entails, right? I think there are some performance coaches which are qualified psychologists, are qualified kind of personal trainers, almost qualified nutritionists, and it massively varies. But ultimately, the role in itself constitutes how. Well, one, I think there's an overlap with the head coach on the culture and the environment, but it really overall starts to shape the way additional factors can impact on the team's performance, as well as the kind of scrim culture, the additional to the kind of scrim culture, the positional coaching, the strategic coaching, everything external to that is where really kind of a lot of time performance coach the importance of what they do lies in what the team eats, in how the team sleeps, in how much physical movement the team gets. Do they just sit at their PCs for 14 hours and order pizzas to their PC? There's a huge variety in. I mean, some players still do that, right? Even at the highest level, this still happens in lots of cases. Some players still go to bed at 4 a.m. when they've got a game the next day. So there's a huge amount of variety in what a performance coach does, but I think the overarching what that role kind of means or what that role is like I say, the external performance additional to the kind of scrim strategic / positional coaching that the team receives, and that goes down to perhaps advising the other coaches on the best way to approach a player from a sports psychology standpoint. Actually, some players really need that pat on the back and come on, like you can be much better than what we've been. Some players really need a stern vertical relationship where someone is quite commanding of them or demanding of that player to get the best out of that player, and perhaps someone with a performance coaching background, a sports psychology background, would be able to notice that better than some of the other coaching staff that have a more specified knowledge within League of Legends. And then same with kind of food, same with sleep, same with physical exercise. They're brought in. Sometimes a performance coach, I guess, or a performance manager type role can coordinate the external consultants, I guess, for different roles. Maybe a performance coach actually is in charge of bringing in nutritionists for certain sessions, or sports psychologists for certain sessions, because sometimes they have an overall holistic knowledge of performance, but actually not a very specified, and perhaps your team is struggling with a certain team is struggling with a more specified area of their performance, and therefore can work on those kind of consultancy levels. But yeah,
I think by the sounds of things, what you say about like they're trying to make sure the players are getting out of bed and doing some exercise and that, I can see why Dignitas doesn't need one dedicated anymore. With that ping pong table in the back, you've got the other problem. You're trying to drag them away from that and actually make them play the game.
They're not playing the game enough. Yeah.
Who's the best on the roster?
Does the start? I think Jensen actually is right now the best one here in the office. I think he's close to me. Like we are the top two in the office here.
Hmm.
But I would say
Not as good as you,
Jensen to
Elias.
boost also the player confidence. Huh?
Not as good as you though, of course.
No, he's better than me. Right now, at least, he's better than me.
Okay.
All right,
That's
nice.
a nice confidence boost too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fair enough.
agreed.
All right,
And
then.
he's had the most experience in offices with ping pong tables, right? More so than perhaps perhaps the rookies.
Like here on the right, you can see the couch where we're doing the review, and after that, we're just having a table tennis directly. So
Yeah, agreed.
yeah.
Cool. Right then, so let's imagine you're first joining a team then. So you've become a coach, or you don't necessarily just become a coach. You're a coach. You've got on a team. I guess usually well, maybe not usually, but how often would it be that straight away you'd need to be involved in building the team, or is it often likely that you'll have a team there already, or it's just the general manager's done that, you're not expected to, and do you prefer to have a say in the team or not? How does that work?
No, of course it depends on what type of team you're entering. In my opinion, for example, maybe let's say you become a coach at an already champion level team, right? So it's obvious that potentially you're just coming there in order to handle better maybe the group, for example, over actually changing members or having a big say on the player, right? But if you're coming to a lower tier type of team, the team that was unsuccessful the year before, then in that case, me personally, I want to have a say also when it comes down to the scouting of the players, to the interviews of the players, to uh, dynamics of the players, inside the team. So I think it differs a lot about which level of team you're entering as a coach. But personally, of course, it depends also on the management side, right? For example, there are some managers that they want to entirely create the roster themselves and take full responsibility of that. But there are other managers that they want to work really close with the head coach and the rest of the staff and actually get all the players that they want to get through a process of interviewing, of tryouting, and eventually contract negotiation, actually getting the player right. So I like to be involved in the second process, basically, from the scouting to the tryouts to the interview with the player, and then potentially, okay, this is the guy, and send it to the management side, for example.
I think this is perhaps a role that the kind of recruitment area is perhaps a role in which League of Legends anyway probably still lacks in quite a lot of teams in quite a lot of regions. I think it is very commonly a coach's off-season role to coordinate with the manager or coordinate with the people that are in charge of the budgets to dictate who they would like to try and sign. I think in perhaps more traditional sports there is a kind of recruitment team or at least some scouts that spend a whole season really paying close attention to players of a particular nature that from both their play to their kind of background, their how they are psychologically, how their personalities would work with your potential team, and in that kind of world, I think when it comes to the end of a split for a coach should then would then have kind of a clearer idea of reports of when the coach describes the type of player they want. Easier suggestions it can come in that direction. I think a lot of time in League of Legends, in my experience anyway, it's comes to the end of a split and it's okay, what are we going to do now? Okay, these are the roles we're going to look for, and it becomes the coach's job to start sitting down, watching a load of odds, maybe utilizing the analyst to try and get some statistical knowledge around certain players. But I think that's where a big role that differs in perhaps traditional sports historically and how they've built their kind of rosters to how League of Legends currently does it. I think maybe there is more room if budgets were allocated for recruitment organizations than there are as a very specific role that, a bit like positional coaches, have a very specific kind of strength. I think there are certain coaches in the past that have done brilliantly at consistently finding brilliant talent or picking the right pieces to fit their puzzle, in which the puzzle was missing, perhaps. And yeah, that's that. I think it really varies org to org on how much of an input a head coach has. I think the other thing we probably haven't touched on is kind of stuff like directors of esports or directors of League of Legends, stuff like this. I think that's become more. We see that in football, for instance, directors of football, where they are responsible for ultimately recruitment of talent, both coaching and playing talent. Where if the head coach happens to change in a team, that director still stays. So the person that's solely responsible for team performance is not necessarily the person responsible for bringing in the talent, because what that offsets is it offsets a world where a player came to a roster because ex-coach wanted him, and now the coach is gone, and that player's then much more unsettled or wants to go with the coach, or those kind of scenarios that may occur. But yeah, that's another model around building rosters, recruiting teams.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask about as well, and Ilias, you kind of mentioned it briefly, was about tryouts, and I guess just how common that is, because I presume it can kind of vary from level to level. So, for example, in like Tier 2 in League of Legends, a lot of teams are basically rebuilding the whole roster every 6 months or every few months because the contracts just don't last that long. Whereas in Tier 1, you might only be replacing one player. And in that case, is it that likely that you would do tryouts with different players, or how does that work? And do you kind of find a difference at different levels?
I think this a lot comes down to the scouting that already has happened too. There's cases, for example, where you want to change a player and you actually know that this is the guy that I want. And there are cases that you have doubts because after checking their votes or talking with the guys, you actually want to see some of their in-game strengths, maybe how they align with the rest of your group, right? Let's say you're getting a player that it's really important for you to be having a really high communication skills, right? This is something that you can't entirely judge from votes, because sometimes maybe the team dynamics of the team before was helping that player talk a lot, but maybe my team is not motivated a player to communicate that much, So I'm running those trials in order for me to be able to get my own conclusions, seeing that player interacting with the rest 4 parts of my team, for example. So the trials is basically answering all the questions I can have potential for a candidate for the position. And if there are many talents on the market, maybe, then you actually want to define yourself who fits the best with the rest of your team, So this is where the tryouts actually take form.
Yeah, I think something like an LCS, LEC level as well, where you're often bringing in imports, or there are imports as options for these rosters. Logistics plays a part in the ability to try out as well, right? And maybe you want a certain Korean player that's in Korea, to just bring that player to LA for a tryout is quite a cost and quite a time. A kind of time pull on things that are going on. So, I mean, in those cases, it's often we perhaps talk to the player, we see some VODs of the player. I think more commonly, those are the kind of methods of recruitment now. When a team decides that we think we want this player based on what we've seen, they then go to actually having conversations with the player, trying to get into that player's mind a little bit, and whether that personality might fit with the personalities that they've got already. And then it's looking at kind of in-person VODs are often requested to a lot of my clients, at least, where they want to see from that player's POV how he played in a more natural environment, perhaps in his old team, where he wasn't trying to just solely impress on that day, but was actually just playing because to compete. And then I mean, there are different methods. I think something like Team Liquid, actually, I believe they had some. They went out to Korea and did some trials in Korea over the last off season. So perhaps some of their Korean imports came from those Korean trials. I know we had some requests our end from players that might want to be trialed by them over in Korea. So there are teams that are making that move, right? They're actually moving themselves towards where there might be a talent pool to offer some tryouts in that sense. But I mean, I think teams in general are probably where a roster is very serious about kind of going towards the top of these major leagues. Often they know or have targets in mind about who they really want and go after direct targets, and then dig a bit deeper to know a bit about those targets that they perhaps didn't know just from watching the guy play. But yeah.
Cool. Right, so once the rosters are sorted then and the season's kicking off, what does the general day-to-day look like? So for example, today you mentioned you kind of got you got scrims after this. How would that actually look? How long do people practice for? What are you doing during and after the practice?
I mean, I think this depends a lot on the culture that you're established to the team, the region you're playing in, right? For example, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but Europe, for example, is running 3 hour scrims, 1 hour break, 3 hour scrims. Here in LCS, we're running 3 hours, 2 hours break, 3 hour scrim, for example. This is something that has been decided by the coaches and the GMs at the start of the season, pretty much. And we say, okay, this is the schedule we want to be following this year, the scrim schedule at least, not necessarily the office schedule or the team schedule, right? And then according to that scrim schedule, we prepare plans that it would benefit the team that we are having. For example, the year before, what we're doing, instead of 4 days of scrims, we're having actually 3 days of scrims. But the 4th day, which would be the first day after the scrim, would be a transition day. This is how we're calling it. We're bringing the players in the office. We're holding team meetings, one-on-ones, setting goals for the week as a team. And then basically we would play the rest 15 games, because it was 5 games scrim last year. And all 5 games, each of the game was as important as playing basically 20 games. So instead of playing 20 and losing 4 games because we don't, because we don't have an idea of how we want to do things, we were setting up everything on Monday, or the first day of the week basically, and then we had every day an idea of what we want to do, so we would save time of doing more extended meetings. We would hold an extended meeting in case of a problem occurred and we actually want to fix that, or if we want to prepare even more specific for an opponent. This year we have been behind in schedule compared to the rest of the teams due to visa issues. For example, our full 5-man roster was completed being here in LCS after week 5, basically. So till that point, and there was no bootcamp prior to the season, so to the split. So we are trying to catch up as much as possible so that we maximize the days of practice. And basically, we're just holding like a meeting prior to scrim. It could be a draft meeting. It could be setting up a goals. It could be like a small presentation that I would prepare about how I want the team to play this week. Or it could be a presentation about our opponent, some that our analysts might have prepared, and discuss about what our opponents are about to play during the week and how we want to allow our practice to take shape, So pretty much the ideal schedule that we're having is basically we're coming in the office around 10:30, 11. Scrim starts at 12. We have a break between 3 to 5. During this 2 hours break, I'm trying either to do team activities. It could be like a board game. It could be like a discussion all together. It could be going to the gym all today. We have a gym right here in the office. Or we could be getting food all together, for example. Then we would come back, prepare, have 3 more games. And after that, usually all of us, without being mandatory, we would stay for 1 to 2 hours behind, inside the office, and we would play solo, could discuss about how the day went, maybe monitoring something more individual from the streams. Maybe there was a detail that we missed and we want to discuss it even further after. So the current day-to-day is looking like this. It's a quite long day, to be honest, because the 2-hour break, people that they're not living close to the office, we're having an apartment office situation. So not all players can be going back to their house and come back to the office, because this will take a lot of time, and in some cases even be costly, right? due to traffic and everything. So we are basically sitting in the office for approximately like 9 to 10 hours. And we are trying to put some activities during these 9 to 10 hours in order to make the day even a bit, not only sitting on a PC and just playing League of Legends, henceforth the table tennis here or
Yeah, breaking
other
that
activities
day
that we're having more down here in the office. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the current day to day that we're having here.
I think that the main kind of important thing that again is very different to traditional sports in a League of Legends world is that the bulk of practice is against other teams in the league, which is very strange for traditional sports, right? You wouldn't have one football team in a league playing a match against or training against another team in the league. But for the purpose of the way scrims work, obviously, because of the practicing against other teams, team schedules are having to be synced in some regard around the scrim hours, and that leads to then the only differences in schedule is one, how those scrims are operated by the team, but then two, how the hours around those scrims are spent, right? And of course, there's a huge efficiency discrepancy between some teams and others in how much good they get out of the hours around the scrims, as well as how efficient the actual scrims are, how goals are looked upon, how kind of certain achievements are reached or certain targets are reached within those scrims, and how those scrims are kind of operated, but and how much value I mean ultimately that you get out of the time that you are practicing and scrimming. So yeah, I mean it's a very strange one, but ultimately you're practicing daily against the other teams in your league when you are. I mean, there's some disparity to that. For instance, like in Europe, the ERL level, you don't need to play against people in your league often. I mean, we're often now finding lots of LFL and LVP teams are playing against other teams in their league because they value that as higher level practice, but over giving potential kind of strategic nous away to those teams. But ultimately at the LEC level, at the LCS level, you are competing versus the other teams in your league on a daily basis, which is an agreed schedule amongst the coaches before the season starts around how that works, so that you can tie that in with each team.
The way that teams scrim against each other, then, does that make it difficult sometimes to actually strategize and practice things? Because, for example, putting it over to traditional sports, a lot of teams would have, you have loads of bench players. So, for example, in football, you have enough players to do a practice match with only your players. So, for anyone that follows English football, there was a couple of years ago, there was a drama where in the Championship, which is the second division, one team had been sending some of their coaches to other teams' training grounds and literally sitting in the bushes with binoculars watching them train, and got caught doing it. And it was a huge thing that they were trying to basically get the upper hand.
It's the
and see what they were
equivalent to
doing.
scrim leaking now, right? It's the equivalent to scrims being leaked from one team to another, perhaps to gain a strategical advantage. That is heavily frowned upon. I think there's been dramas in the past that have come out where teams have been accused of leaking scrims and such. Teams that teams believe that to be the case often get pretty quickly rejected in a lot of kind of scrim environments. So the bad outweighs the good often for teams that have that approach, in as much as they start to not get practice, or lesser practice, we'll say. But I think, yeah, I mean, maybe Elias has got some stuff to add, but really, you don't schedule your next opponent as a scrim partner for that week, right? You schedule teams that you're not playing for a couple of weeks to actually play locally, right? To avoid, I mean, maybe by the time you play that team, you're on a different patch. You've developed different strategy at that point. So, yeah.
I mean, yeah, as you said, pretty much you said everything. If there is a scrim leaker, or if we see a team that is talking a lot more than the rest, probably this is lower in the list of the teams that you want to scrim against, because you don't want everything that you're playing to be leaked around. Obviously, if you're scrimming teams on rotation, right? Like, let's say you make a unique strategy and you play someone that someone might actually say, "Oh, that strategy I really liked. I'm gonna do it also on my next opponent." Eventually, everybody knows it. The whole thing is they don't know from which team it started, basically.
It's a Chinese whispers game,
Yeah.
where one team plays a specific counter pick or a specific strategy against a certain thing, and you're the only one to do it, and then the team you play it against then tries it against the team they scrim tomorrow because
Yeah.
X pick is so OP, but there's a unique counter pick that a team is trying or a player is specialized in. So, but by the time that your game comes around at the weekend or whatever, maybe everybody's been trying that pick against that champ. You don't know, and yeah, that's where it becomes.
You might think that you have something really unique and you're gonna catch people off surprise with that, and suddenly everybody's playing on the wing, and you're like, "Oh no!" Everybody knows, So you're not actually surprising some. That is the biggest issue when you're screaming on rotation the same teams. For example, especially here in LCS, it's even harder than LEC, for example, because we're having to play basically the same teams on a weekly basis. Of course, I'm not screaming the team that I'm going to be facing this week or in 2 weeks probably, but it's always that type of rotation pretty much. So yeah, we're trying to avoid repetitive scrim partners and and avoiding people that potentially talk too much when it comes down to scrims.
Of course.
And then I guess talking of matches then specifically, so how does the actual match day look? So even just like logistically, do you have to get there X amount of hours before the broadcast starts, or just how do things work generally like
that? Personally, we're bringing the players usually 4 to 5 hours before the game, and after that we're having like the daily draft meet where we prepare for our opponent. Followed that after by having a dinner close to not a dinner, food all together as team 3 hours before the game. Then we are relaxing basically for around like 40 to 50 minutes, and we are watching potentially some of the games that have been played before us. We discuss about our strategy of the day, what we're going to be playing, get the players in the right mindset of knowing exactly what they will be playing today. And after that, we're traveling obviously to the studio where the official game has been played. Usually this happens like 1 hour 45 minutes prior. I think that's it at least for LCS. I don't know about LEC.
Yeah, I think it's 2 hours for LEC just because the nature of Berlin and how spread out it is.
Yeah. I mean, Los Angeles is pretty big to be fair.
Yeah, sure.
Being someone that also was in Berlin and LA. Yeah, it's a similar situation probably. But yeah, and then the player we go to the studio. We're waiting there. Usually, I have some notes that I prepare for the players prior to the game, a revision of the week, what were the goals and what we want to do this week, and what I want to see going into this official game. And then the players pretty much go on stage after that. So this kind of our official game day schedule.
And then what are the kind of last things you'd say to the team then? Literally, I guess you'd still be on stage. You've just done the draft. What's the final kind of message you usually give?
I mean, this depends a lot on how the week of practice went, for example, or what is the most important point of the day, Let's say we're facing an opponent that heavily plays topside, Like I'm going to remind them, for example, about the specific visions, that we want to have around that area, for example. Or I will remind them some cheesy situations that the opponent might actually execute inside the game. Like there are 20 seconds, and I want them to remember some crucial points because the rest of the game they know it because all the week we have been preparing for it. So I'm just giving them those important points that I want them to remember going into the first 3-4 minutes of the game, and then they will take it from there inside the game, pretty much. Of course, there are situations where we're having before even the draft, the speeches, right? But this just differs from team to team. Personally, we're discussing about what we want to do and not what our opponent wants to do, and how our practice led up to this, for example. Or in some cases, I'm having the players make the speech in order to to be also in my shoes, of the
Mhm.
discussing of talking things to their teammates. So I think it changes from coaching stuff to coaching stuff. So I don't know how others doing it, but this is how I'm doing things here.
Mhm. What about feedback you'd give in like a best of series? Because we always see like the clips when it's like between matches, especially like the LEC. Somehow they're always standing in the car park for some reason and eating a banana or whatever between matches. What kind of stuff would you say then? Because I've seen the arguments of like maybe the time's so short, it's hard to. You're not exactly going to try and teach them something new in that kind of time because it's just not time to take it on and act on it properly. So what kind of things would you say between games like that?
Usually I'm focusing first on watching something like if my opponent did something specific on the first game, I want to tell them really fast. For example, our opponent did this. I'm not going to sit down and discuss on the mistakes unless actually I notice, for example, a lack of communication, and I'm going to measure. I want to communicate this way going to the next game, because this is not what we practice this way, for example, But I'm not going to be harsh, or I'm not going to be creating skepticism or feeling the players like we're in a really problematic situation. Let's say we lost the game one, right? In that situation, problem going to be discussing about our strengths, more about what we practice, what we prepared for, how we're going to approach the next game. And if I felt like there was a specific problem, why went behind on the first game, I'm just going to measure that. Hey, careful on the next game. Don't do this, for example. On the other hand, if we actually won it, we are going between the breaks. I'm trying to calm down a bit the excitement of winning the first game, because usually excitement could be uh, the biggest enemy, in a BO5, for example. So in that situation, I just want them to relax a bit, focus again, come back to reality, that we still have more games to play, discuss on what is our practice goal and what probably our opponent is going to do the next game and how we are going to be executing according to that, pretty much. So it depends always on the result of the previous game, how you want to approach the break between those games.
So I think one key between kind of especially long series is often just that you're trying to create spells of periods of intense focus as opposed to one drawn out period of waning focus where it slowly falls off a cliff, right? Because ultimately people can't focus beyond kind of 40, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. It starts to have diminishing returns as time goes on. So if you can break each game down into bite-sized periods of there's a bit of a reset between and you go again and then you can maintain focus. That's where the kind of relax comes in, or the bit of fresh air, or a slightly different environment, or thinking about something slightly different for a moment allows for the players to kind of regain their focus between from one game to the next. And I think the other thing, like I said, there's using your voice to remind the mind players of specialized knowledge, right? Like well, this team particularly does this, or this kind of cheers, or this kind of vision. Like remember that they play heavily like this, so there's specialized knowledge based on your opponent that perhaps that they wouldn't integrate into their mainstream thinking about the game, but in particular in this particular game you're about to play, this is a more likely scenario that may happen than in previous games that we've played. So trying to fill the players with that specialized kind of, we've done the preparation, but remember, because your autopilot won't necessarily remember these certain things, but you need to in these particular moments, because that's where teams can punish, right?
Cool. Fair enough. Maybe just one more question then to end off, because Elias, I know it's getting a bit busy on your end now.
Yeah.
Maybe a quick two-part question. What is the best and worst part about being a coach?
I think the best for me is that I get to know so many different people, so many different personalities. I'm lucky enough, for example, here at Dignitas to have 10 people working with me, and include the management, like 6 staff, right? So I'm really blessed to be calling all these people not just co-workers or my team, but like more, I see them more as a brotherhood, all of them, and this is exciting in every team that you are going, or in every player that you're having in your team. And I really enjoy the whole process of that. So I think that's one of the best things for me, at least. One of the worst things is sitting on that backstage, not having full control about what's going to happen in the game, and either watching your team winning it or losing it, and not knowing that you don't have more power over it while they're playing. I think that's the worst things because, as well, all the coach says, it's so stressful coaching when it's time for official game because you're watching the players and you know that what is done, you already did it, and there's nothing more that's going to change at that point. So, yeah, I think these are the worst and best things for me.
It can be super frustrating when you know your team is capable of something as well, and you've seen them show how capable they are of something, and on game day, you just see a different team. And I think more often than not, I always think practice makes permanence, and you tend to see as you've practiced over a period of time, what happens in practice comes out in reality in the actual stage games. But when you when the team underperforms or teams underperform and don't display what you know they're capable of, that frustration where you didn't have the ability to step in halfway through that and maybe get them back on track, or like words would, I mean, in a traditional sport, you have a halftime break, you can shout from the sidelines, you have some interaction with the team to try and get them rejig their minds to thinking perhaps that we can do this, we are capable of this, or whether that's motivational or whether that's strategical. There's the essence to add both from a traditional sports coach, but as a League of Legends coach, you're almost muted. I mean, you are muted,
You're muted.
and cannot impact what you're seeing unfold in front of you. Hopefully, your practice and preparation has led that they would take charge of the situation, but ultimately you can't do anything once the game started.
Yeah,
definitely. And yeah, we can call it there then. So you guys can go and play table tennis in the back. And
that's for sure what we're gonna do now.
Elias, just one quick thing from me, I guess. I just wanted to obviously as someone there's not I mean there's more recently, but there's not so many coaches that have coached in both. I mean you've coached in Turkey, Europe, and North America, right? But what do you think the main differences for you have been as a coach from coaching in the LEC with Misfits and now in the LCS with Dignitas? And then I mean answer that one first, and then there's just a little kind of follow up bit to that.
I think the difference for me, actually, what I said coming to NA the first time is I had a small culture shock when it came down to scrim practice, right? I felt like we were more tryhard in Europe compared to NA. This doesn't mean that right now this doesn't happen in the NA scene. I think this year scrims and official games have been better than the year before, but it's more like for the year before when initially first game, right?
Yeah.
I think it's entirely about the culture. I think in Europe, in some case, we're fighting for these spots, fighting to death for these spots. Let's put like this, while maybe in an age due to the limited amount of people, everyone is getting rotated, so they're more like, oh, it's a guaranteed spot kind of.
I'll be in a team no matter what happens. Even if I lose on this team, I'll go to another LCS team.
You can say I'm gonna be in LCS or I'm gonna be academy, but I'm gonna be having that job, But in Europe, for example, and the salaries are kind of similar, for example, right? In LCS.
Academy salaries are still high as well, right? In generally.
I mean, in Europe, for example, there are many areas that you're not having this type of salaries, for example, So exactly. You're trying so much to grind your way to the higher ERLs and eventually LEC, right? So I think we're having a bit more grinding mindset in Europe compared to NA.
It's really not a career in Europe unless you get into one of the top ERLs, and then even then, like it's not a huge salary compared to some certain things.
Yeah, but of course, as I said, this year due to NA slowly bringing plenty of imports, right? The local talent, I feel like it's been threatened, kind of, so they are being pushed to perform more and grind more. And I think actually there are NA people that they have been starting to become better and better. They have started getting that grindset mindset, and I think this is the biggest difference that I had from LEC to LCS, I don't think that there are players here in America that they couldn't play, for example, in Europe, because I think the talent exists. I think it's all about mindset, honestly. And right now, I feel like LCS is on a good way of fixing that, but still, LEC has been all its lifetime of League of Legends been on this, and I think that's the difference.
And I mean, that kind of answers my final point to that question is, what do you think NA could do to be more what do you think the main thing is that either stops NA being so competitive internationally, or what do you think needs to change in it? It may be just the mindset, like you say, but what do you think is the main thing that needs to change for NA to be competitive internationally across? I mean, it is in some regards, but not in others, right? So what do you think NA could do to be more of a competitive kind of force?
I think it's more about believing also in their local players too, in some cases, and actually providing the right support for their local players to grow. I think there are some really good local players that with the right support, they can become actually the future of the region. Let's like this, In Europe, I feel like we're providing the support a lot more, because the players go through so many different coaches, so many different styles, so different opponents, and having this grind set. While in America right now they're close to this point, but they just need that extra push and trust, basically, So I think it's a combination from both the players and also the orgs of creating this, establishing this relationship. Yeah, the tryhard from the player side and the trust to the process from the organization side.
Sure. Thank you.
Very nice. Right, I think with that then we can more or less wrap it up. So thanks for joining us, Elias. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate all of you.
Be sure to say hello from us to Armut and Jensen. We can see walking about in the back before. And yeah, anyone that's been listening then or watching, wherever you've done so, you can obviously follow, like, comment, help all the algorithms and everything. And you can follow all of us as well. Our Twitters will be on the screen. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.